Hello, Positive Filter viewers and listeners. We are back for another episode of Positive Filter. Today, I'm joined by three special guests, and this is a part of my Identities in Career Services series. If you joined us yesterday, we did Mothers in Career Services, and tonight we're going to be doing LGBTQIA plus folks in career services. I am joined by three special guests, and I just want to give two kind of disclaimers. One, I am a cisgendered heterosexual male, and so I also use this platform as an opportunity to not only learn for teach or not teach, but share those experiences. But it's also an opportunity for me to learn. So I'm gonna just do a disclaimer. I might say things wrong, and this is going to be an opportunity for me to grow and learn. And this is, as the podcast, that was the biggest point of making this podcast for people with different identities, is to learn from their experiences. Another disclaimer I want to do is that while I have three individuals, they are not representative of a whole identity group. I say that as a Black male, that I don't represent all Black males. So understand that these are three individuals' perspectives. Does not mean that we will have some anecdotal conversations, we'll have some personal experiences, but that I won't even try to say that is representative of everyone, and that's just kind of how I try to say that, because I want to make sure I'm representing, not representing, but respecting others. And then lastly, I also want to say that yesterday I did this as a whole panel. And I wanted to make sure that maybe for this one, I'm going to go back to the format that I had for the fathers in career services, where I get to interview them one-on-one. So I'm going to be bringing on each guest one-on-one. So I'm going to do quickly a shout out to not my sponsors, because I'm going to have no sponsors, but a quick shout out to two things that I like to use, and I think I wanted to share with the listeners. So one, if you know, I'm a big proponent of gratitude. And so one tool that I use for gratitude is my 5-minute journal by Intelligent Change. Change has really helped me. This platform has really helped me increase my gratitude. And by doing so, writing it each day has rewired my brain. So check it out, Intelligent Change. And then the second I wanted to share is a podcast or web show by one of my fraternity brothers. It's called Tiny Froze. So Tiny Froze is a web series about a millennial that follows Friona, a mental health professional who struggles with relationships, career goals, and the infamous imposter syndrome, with commentary from a few lively personalities. So this show you can see on YouTube. Shout out to my good frat brother, Mike Frimpong. So without further ado, we're going to bring on my first guest, Sandra. And so let me not just hesitate. I'm going to bring on Sandra. There you go. So, Sandra, good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, the first question I have is, I really want to just know what you feel comfortable. What are your salient identities that you would like to share with the listeners before we get into this conversation?
Are you talking about like queer identities?
Yes.
So yeah,
yes.
I would identify as a queer woman.
Yes. Okay. And I was just saying that because I want to make sure that I get that out there. What identities?
Oh, that's fine. And I think it also like changes in context. Like gender queer would be probably more normal for me. In the work context, I might just say queer woman. Again, working within the limitations of other people's knowledge and comfort levels in the workplace.
Thank you. See, and that's the things. This is kind of the dialogue that I wanted to have, because one, you said earlier, you just said in the context of what people are comfortable with. So can you kind of go into detail why do you say that in the context of what people are comfortable with? Because that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, if anyone knew me in a professional context, they would probably just hear me identify as queer. But I'm thinking of like generally the career services profession and workplaces levels of knowledge, and then comfort with terminology and understanding what I'm saying and what is meant by the words that I'm using.
See, thank you.
I don't really care if you're comfortable with my identity. It's none of my business.
See, there you go, right? Yeah, like I love
But
that. Yeah.
I just meant like language wise, like I want to make sure we're on a similar page.
See, I like that. And and I like that. I actually really like that. And I'm going to keep on going with that because I like that you said that in the context of language, this is it. But in the comfortable, like, I don't, like, I am who I am and who I identify with. So it's not your comfortability. It's just in a sense of context, language, and connection and processing, right? And I think words matter. So I do really appreciate language because, sometimes, which I'm really trying to figure out because I'm really a person of words matter. And sometimes I'm so literal that I really did have a hard time, even when I went through safe zone training. And I was like, I was trying to like put people in boxes and really conceptualize this. And I was like, I'm just confused. And I don't know if that's the context of the workplace or like, can you speak to that confusion?
Yeah, I think it's hard for everyone to be on the same page because language is very personal, especially when you're talking about identity language. It's very individualistic. So I could say I'm genderqueer and you could say you're genderqueer, and we could have different meanings for that and different ways that we're using it to describe ourselves. So I think that's one thing that makes it, I think, more challenging for people to understand. If they want someone neatly put in a box, it's harder to do that when you're expanding beyond the false gender binary. And I think that's where most people might feel challenged. That's why I suspect that, and I have any data to back it up, because they're not comfortable with the reality that anyone could identify using any language that they want. There are common things in communities, but language changes very quickly too, right? I feel very comfortable identifying as queer or gender queer. If you were to ask maybe an older gay man if he was comfortable with that, he might say no, because it might have a negative connotation to the word queer. They may have been harassed and bullied with that. And so how people are comfortable with language changes. I think there's a lot of dynamics that play into that. It might be some generational things. It might be personal context, like how was that word used and applied to you? And, how have you heard that word being used before? I think maybe, some generations would be even more uncomfortable if I were to say, I identify as a butch dyke. Right? That's a very neutral language, but depending on how you've heard it and how you've used it personally, it may have very different meanings. And so it's always good to be mindful of that. I also don't think we should be so afraid of like getting things wrong when we're trying to learn. Again, because people may use words and terminology differently. There's disagreement in the literature. There's different disagreements among scholars about how are we defining trans? Is it inclusive of non-binary identities? Is it not? Should you be using an asterisk? Should you not be using an asterisk? And so you could subscribe to many ideas about that. And depending on where you sit and where you lie on that, you may be in disagreement with a lot of people. So I worry less about getting it perfect, and more about being understanding that it is individualistic and it is personal and it can change and it's very fluid. And so I think it's best to like preface how you're using language and why, and ask people what they're comfortable with when you're referring to them.
I love that, and I use it now. That's probably I'm also probably use that as my caveat because what I've learned over time is then I just say, "How would you like me to address you?" You can't really go wrong when you ask someone that, and then they respond, and then you make a due diligence to do and respond as such, really, really thoughtfully, like in how you write it in emails and how you do it when you speak out loud. So I kind of now that's kind of my go-to now. It's like, how would you like me to address you? And then I do that, and then I just try to stick to it very strictly. I'm a person like my wife calls me a Amelia Bedelia. Have you heard of that story before?
No.
It's a childhood story where a woman would, like a person would say like put the lid on, like they'd use slang, but the person would be very literal.
Oh,
And
okay.
like I can't think of one right now, but she calls me a bit because I literally would say she'll say something and I would go to the T and like open the lid, do this. She's like Philip, and that's just how I am. That's how I am. So I'm gonna jump into it. Now we're gonna really infuse. Like that was a great introduction about who you are and your identities. But I want to jump into why we got connected. So shout out to Samara. She connected me because of a NACE article that you wrote. And I'm putting it in the chat, which was called Presenting My Authentic Self. So for those that don't know, can you just give like a brief synopsis of that article that I'll share? And I think this can drive the discussion about career services and your experience.
Sure. So the NACE blog was really intended as, I guess, part of an effort with NACE to shed light on issues in our profession. I think, people think of higher education as this very inclusive space and you should always be yourself. And, people probably coach students in that way sometimes, which, has risks involved if we're not being mindful of the literature and discrimination in the workplace and the realities of the risks involved with being authentic and presenting authentically in the hiring processes and in the workplace. But really, it was really about shedding light on my own experiences. I had experienced, very significant changes in the way I was treated by my previous employer when I decided to kind of stop covering. So I covered for a lot of my life. I had long hair, dressed very feminine. For many years, I wasn't out about my wife. So I wouldn't even disclose my close personal relationship. And so, I knew that that was not rewarded. There were many signals present in the workplace. And we know that as a standard in the US, there's different norms in the workplace. Workplaces are sexualized, they're heterosexualized. They are gendered, but they're cisgendered. And so you learn kind of through those rules and through your employers kind of what's acceptable, what's not, what presents risk, what doesn't. And, based on those experiences, I chose to cover for, my protection and my career, my ability to grow in my career. And then I got to a point where I didn't want to do that anymore. And I, started just by cutting my hair short and was microaggressed by faculty. People reacted very poorly to it. I should say some people, because there were a lot of supportive, wonderful people. And then I, started wearing more masculine tailored clothes and Oxfords and, kind of each level of revealing who I was faced with more and more unpleasant behavior from other individuals. And so, working in career services and having to deal with employers who were not necessarily supportive or pleasant or affirming in any way, who may have acted with hostility. How do you kind of navigate that as someone who works in career services? Because we're not like other parts of higher education where, there's not as many consequences. Career services is positioned in a way where we have multiple stakeholders and we're really important to them, right? If our placement numbers are down, the office of the president is going to be concerned. It drives admissions. So the admissions office is going to be concerned. So if you have a hostile employer who employs a large percentage of your students, how strongly are you going to react, if you're going to react at all? Because there's so many different levels of administrative politics involved, and then there's the real life consequences for your students, right? Do you want to risk a relationship that's positive for a lot of your students, even though it may not be for some of them, or even the staff in the office? I think in career services, we like to talk about equity and inclusion and diversity, but we do that more externally with employers and more with students. And we don't think a lot about how we're behaving. What environments are we modeling? What behaviors are we modeling for people? If we're not even inclusive of our own practitioners in our field, at the national association levels, at the regional association levels, in our individual offices, then what progress are we really making? And so that was really what that was about. It was sharing my experience, one, so that people who have similar experiences don't feel alone, and they can see that represented on a national level through NACE, and also draw attention to those issues through NACE, that, it's time that we really make some progress and have these difficult conversations, because I think people have been afraid to do that. I don't know a lot of directors of career services who are willing to have a conversation with their president about, I know this employer represents about 35% of our placements, but they were, rude or hostile or not inclusive, or they're not hiring, these different types of students. Would you be okay if we, took action, and not so much against them, but reinforcing that we have specific norms and standards. Some institutions won't even allow you to have a non-discrimination agreement with an employer. So if that's the level we're at right now, I think we're really behind in what we need to be doing.
Wow. I had so many, I was trying to process and I was really listening. And this is one of those things where I was trying to listen and also not interrupt you because I'm really working on my active listening skills. But my one question though is you did say um, that you had some supportive colleagues. And that really resonated with me because I think that obviously in your thing that really shed light to me. So what could, and like I said, generally, what could colleagues do um, to be better allies and not just performative allies in that space and in those struggles? And like I said, just suggestions and thoughts because that really resonated with me. That part of like, it felt very isolating. It felt like a very lonely space. Uh, and I don't think that feels good. So can you explain that? What can we do?
Sure. I mean, there are things that people can do individually. I think, if you're wondering how do you support, the queer or, gender diverse person in your office, I would ask them what feels like support to them and how do they want you to do it? Because again, like language, that could be very personal.
Mhm.
And so, I think general things, if you see someone being microaggressed in the workplace or who looks like they're uncomfortable or you heard somebody say something and it made your head tilt like, oh, okay, speak up. It's hard to when you're the person being, microaggressed and you're one of only maybe a handful or maybe the only like gender queer a queer person in your office or someone with an identity in the alphabet soup. Um, you know it's hard to always have to manage those relationships because, I said in the blog, like the moment somebody said something rude about my haircut and infantilized me and compared me to a child who's incapable of making decisions, whose brain isn't fully developed, who doesn't have the level of maturation to make, decisions about who they are. Um, I have to process all of that in a split second and decide how I'm going to react and how I'm going to maintain my professionalism, how I'm going to maintain our working relationship if I want to continue to do that. Is this something that meets the muster of what I would consider, a violation of Title IX? Is this something I want to bring up to HR? All of these things are happening at a rapid pace in like a split
Lot.
second. And then I'm trying to, also be mindful of, reacting with compassion. I don't know this person's life history. I don't know why they think these things. I don't know why they're doing this. And again, I think there's a focus on impact over intent. I don't think it's the best way to look at everything, right? Intent does matter to an extent. If that person intended to hurt me, that would probably, be felt. And that one, I think, in some ways was, and in some ways just might have been ignorance. And I'll never know, right? And that's the hard part about microaggressions. I'll never really know why you did it or why you said it unless you explain yourself. And then it's like, do you want to confront them in the, faculty copy room while you're getting ready for a workshop?
No, not at all.
Um,
Not at all.
so, it's easier if somebody else is willing to speak up. I had a colleague in the situation I referenced in the blog where I had a faculty member just completely ignore that I existed and would just not look at me, not acknowledge me, even though I was the only person in the office who could help them with what they needed. And I did have a coworker speak up and say, you need to talk to Sandra. Sandra's right here. Sandra's the person who's responsible for this. She's great. You should talk to her. And would just like get up and point over to me. And despite that, this individual decided to just pretend that I wasn't there and look above me and wait until, my AVP came back to the office and would ask him the question. But she tried, right? Like she got up, she got out of her chair. She had done that on multiple occasions. And we had discussions about this behavior and reported the behavior. So speaking up, I think is a really, it makes a strong impression, right? That's like the most obvious support. Also educating yourself. You don't want to be the person responsible for teaching everyone about your identity. Sometimes it's great, and I do enjoy like educating and engaging in those conversations. I'm not afraid of being offended in those conversations either. I think we have to make space for people who are coming in at different knowledge levels. I happen to be more open with that. I don't, normally take offense if I'm being misgendered. It happens a lot. If I'm rolling up to the gas station and I have sunglasses on, it's really easy to misidentify, right? But they're doing it out of being polite. They're like, "Oh, hey, sir," and then they apologize as soon as they like actually interact with me with the window down. And I've had that stuff happen at schools too. So, I kind of make room for that. But I think, important things are, ask for what kind of support they want, speak up when you see things happening. Don't let people off the hook for it if they're repeatedly offending somebody. Make sure you're setting proper norms for behavior and you're modeling the things that we want to normalize, right? A lot of us will have our pronouns on our chat names on Zoom or here or in our email signatures, but how often are we actually using them in practice? Are we being mindful of the other people in the room and their potential marginalized identities that aren't obvious, right? I think if you look at my blog, someone might not have in the before picture assumed anything about me having some kind of queer identity, but still was, right? Married to a woman in that photo. And so, being mindful that you're not always going to see and people aren't always going to give you access to their identities. They may be covering out of, a defense mechanism, out of a survival mechanism. And I can tell you, if your environment was more inclusive, you wouldn't hear these stories of people saying, "Well, we don't have any of those people here. We don't have those students here. We don't have trans students here. So it's not really a thing that we need to cater to." I've heard that a lot. You do. You have people who are, identifying, as LGBTQIA plus. They're just not out to you because you have not presented a safe environment for them to do so, or they're, just assuming until they're proven otherwise that your office may cause harm in some way and it's not safe. And so I would, caution people that there are probably more people in your office and on your campuses that identify, in those communities than you may think.
That's so helpful. And I was like, man, I think we might need to do a part two. Just you, I think we could go on and on because I barely got like two questions out, and this was like
Sorry.
really no. This is great. Like, literally, I don't have any chance to even take notes, but this is something I'm gonna definitely listen to later because I'm learning so much from this. So I definitely had this one in my head that I really wanted to do, and that is, where do you think and I know we got like 3 minutes because I want to get Steve on here next, but where do you think the direction of, you said it earlier, like we got a long way to go. So where do you think the direction, particularly in the micro sense of career services, because it's just one unit, and then if you do have time, the macro sense of higher ed in general, where do you think the direction where we need to go? Maybe give like two
Where we need
suggestions.
to go, or like how far we are from that.
Let's do that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can, yeah, take
We're
that.
nowhere near where we want to be in either of those spaces. I think people have this idea that higher education is very liberal and progressive. And I would caution you to read more closely in the news and to look at what's happening on campuses, to look at what's happening in states where there are like large public universities and private universities. The fact that there are so many anti-trans legislation bills being put through or passed. People do not have access to gender affirming care now at younger ages. There's a lot of stuff going on, and that is not insulated. Higher ed is not insulated from that. I think, public higher education has a lot of, interactions with politicians and government and political influence. And I think that also trickles down into the education system. I also think that we are not, as kind of forward thinking as we should be, or as inclusive as we should be in the workplace and just generally in our society. And so that, creeps into the institutions as well, in institutional leadership. And if I've known anything about higher ed, there's a large group of people in it in positions of power who are happy with the way things have always been and don't want to change them. And if you're the person who's clamoring for change, nobody likes a squeaky wheel. So you kind of have to pick your battles and be strategic in what you're responding to and how you're advocating. Career services is probably, I think, less further along than other parts of higher education, even those positioned within student affairs. And I think there are differences sometimes when you're positioned in academic affairs versus student affairs. But I think people have this mindset that we're further along than we really are. And I would encourage them to engage in the literature and to read the news more closely, and listen to their students and understand what their needs are. But I am pleasantly, not surprised, but I guess really grateful for NACE focusing so much now on DEI and giving me a voice through the blog and through the journal, and giving voice to other people who are able to share their stories and really push for the change. And it's not so much clamoring for everything to change all at once. It's a lot of conversations for people to have and reflect internally. Like, if you're not willing to grow as a human being, how are we all going to grow as a profession? But I am seeing changes in the professional standards that guide career services at the, national levels. And definitely in higher education, the NASPA, ACPA, like all these major associations. I think there are a lot of people who are, ready to implement these changes, who have been doing this work for years. And I'm very grateful for all of them. But I do think we still have quite a long way to go. I got a large reaction from people reading my blog on LinkedIn and then sharing their stories with me, or sharing their stories on LinkedIn, kind of sharing that NACE blog. All of those people work in career services and have been treated with hostility and have been, discriminated against and have had really negative experiences. And a lot of them have left the field. And I think that's part of that, great resignation. It's great because things in career services weren't great and things in higher ed weren't great. And people, I think, just got tired of it and wanted to go somewhere that's finally, going to be better or more inclusive. I think I was part of that. I didn't leave higher ed, but I definitely changed institutions. And I'm at a place now that is much more progressive in terms of their policy developments and their education and their resource development on campus. And I will say, the first day I was walking across campus, someone stopped me and they said, I'm sorry, I just have to tell you, I love your haircut. And it was just such a difference from where I was, a few weeks earlier. And that meant a lot to me. So, I think there are a lot of places that are, working to be very inclusive and are doing that work and are committed to doing it. But I think there's a large chunk of institutions that don't feel ready or don't necessarily feel the urgency to be better or to adapt, changes to be more inclusive. And that doesn't apply just to LGBTQIA plus populations. That's all marginalized identities.
I love it. Well, I was about to just echo that. I like your haircut too. It's very nice.
Thank you.
It's bad because sometimes I get my hair, and then when I get a haircut, they say, "Oh, your haircut's so nice," but they're just saying it because I needed to cut my hair a long time ago.
Well, I'm
So,
due for a cut this weekend.
yeah, so it is very nice. Well, thank you, Sandra, for joining us. We
Thanks
definitely
for
gonna
having
link
me,
up.
Phil.
We're definitely gonna link up. Last plug, before we take on Steve, how would you like people to connect with you and follow up with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Sandra Buati-Ramos. You could also look at -coachingandconsulting.com. I have a private business that I also work with, but I would encourage anybody, like, if you have similar experiences or you just want to learn more, like, feel free to reach out to me. I am very kind in my online communications. I try to respond to everyone, and it doesn't cost you anything to ask a question. So if you want to connect, much like Samara, I'm happy to connect you with anyone I know if you're looking for support and resources. And I hope Samara is watching this somewhere. Thank you for connecting, Phil and I.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. And so next up, we have Steve Savinski. So I'm just going to bring him on and go ahead. There you go. Welcome,
Hi,
Steve.
Phil. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So now, yeah, I'm definitely going to just ask that first question to all my guests. What is your salient identities? How would you like to be addressed? And I'm gonna use Sandra's language. I like that. How would you like to be addressed?
Sure, sure. So I go by he him pronouns. I am a cisgender, gay, neurodivergent, white male. Those are the identities that I have. But call me Steve.
There you go. I love it, Steve. So, my question, I'm gonna go right into you, is that as you navigated this space, particularly as a gay male, uh, were you able to connect with a community in this space in career services, maybe early on, prior to me and you knowing each other?
I would say it definitely took time. I think going to when I was in graduate school at Marquette, so I moved out to Milwaukee to the Midwest for a couple years, and I think it started with identifying a need. I talk about when I was out there, I was a grad assistant on part of the student employment program and helped put together the first LGBTQ plus inclusion training for student employees there, and I just kind of saw a need. I didn't really meet anyone with in the LGBTQIA plus community in career development out there, but over time I certainly did, and I would say that for me, I kind of the first way as far as like developing community, developing mentorship was just connecting with people with similar identities as myself in the first couple of roles that I held in career services. So I like to think about how when I took my first job out of grad school, I came back to the Boston area and I worked at what was formerly Wheelock College as a career counselor. And for me, what made me feel comfortable being out at work there, and kind of that was that first space that I was seeing people who are out in that space. In particular, I was on the student success team, and the associate dean at the time, Paul Hastings, openly gay male, happily married, and further along in his career than me, just seeing him made me and getting to know him made me feel more comfortable in the space. And I think that organically led to me going from not even being out in one role till several months in to in the interview for my current role at Northeastern, which I'm coming up on 3-year anniversary. So yes, really happy there and excited for that. I talked about some of my involvements outside of work as part of who I am. So it was an evolution over the course of several years, and I'm just going to keep going with it. And I've learned that the process of coming out never really ends. You're always doing. You might do it in different ways, different spaces. I just talked to a colleague slash mentor the other day who I've known for years, and he didn't know I was gay, and then we went into a really good conversation about that. And I always knew that individual would be supportive, but I guess it never actually specifically come up in conversation. So I realized that you're coming out just it's an ongoing process, and it's one that I go from being worried about having anxiety to enjoying it. I love it. I love to talk about some of the sports leagues I'm involved in around the Boston area. They're so much fun, and they've helped me grow in addition to just being more out and about in the field.
I love that. And one of the things I was thinking about too is, but is it it's not your responsibility to be out or in, as in coming out. Um, you know, I mean, I'm trying to explain it in a sense like, like you're saying like that discussion as identities, like you're being who you are. Uh, it doesn't matter. Like you're Steve in my sense, and it's not the responsibility. Like I think kind of what Sandra was saying, like it's the other person's responsibility to learn. You don't have to educate all the time. So can you speak to that, like others taking ownership of their learning rather than you have to be on the you have to be the responsible one for the teaching? if that makes
Sure,
sense.
sure. So, first off, I would say that part of that taking ownership and responsibility for the learning that falls on me as a cisgender gay male. So even just I was thinking watching the first segment with Sandra about when I put together that inclusion training at Marquette all those years ago. I didn't do it alone. And I knew barely anything about gender identity at that time. So I really did have to educate myself and continue to. So I think it started with me needing to feel vulnerable in that space. As far as other people educating themselves on my identity, I would say that I'm out and about, proud and everything. I would say that I definitely don't want them to assume that all gay men are like me. There's a lot of different personalities out there, and there's some common ground to a point with being gay, but that's not. You educate yourself on the fact that I don't represent everyone in the community. The privileged identity I have of being a white male influences the lens with which someone's going to see me, or how I'm going to interact in the space. Being neurodivergent definitely has an impact there on how I'll interact as well. So just knowing that not only do I not represent everyone and kind of that piece of it, but also the fact that that there's so many other components to me. I mean, I know that this might sound a little bit more trivial, but if I could say foodie is one of my identities, I'd throw that one out there too. I love to cook. I love good like good food, and but that plays a huge part in who I am as well. So just basically trying to put the energy out there to people to yes, educate yourself, but know that in the sense that I'm not the only, it's not just me.
I love that. And so, I kind of want to go to, I like this too, because we're in this, career space and this is always in my mind too, is performative versus authentic. And so what can someone do to show authentic allyship and authentic support rather than performative? Um, you know, in that space, you go through the safe zone training, you get a sticker, but let's go beyond that. Like, what's some ways that people could do this, particularly in the career service space, colleagues, because that's what we're talking about in career services.
So I think a few things as far as that performative piece, the putting something on one's email signature with a rainbow flag, or saying inclusivity, or one of those symbols, when you haven't really taken the time beyond the couple hour training to learn about the community. I mean, I will say that you might think to yourself, Steve, why would you go to those if you're gay and you kind of understand? No, and even if it's a baseline training, I go because I can have different conversations with people, and I can always pick up new facts and new things that I wouldn't have known before. I mean, I'd say as far as true allyship in our space is, recognizing what you know and what you don't know. And also, part of our roles is to give the best advice possible, make our students successful, and be supportive of them in their career search, with whether it's jobs, internships, co-op, and kind of finding that balance of really giving them advice that they're going to be successful, while also acknowledging that there's some things that you want to change, and pointing out what you think should change and how you're trying to. I mean, I interact with employers and kind of within that space, whether it's talking about gendered language on a job description. I've even I work with a lot of international students, so even some of the language in the job descriptions around communication skills, and that could bring imposter syndrome. So I think about that piece of it as well. I think that even in thinking about, as far as like the allyship piece, I think a lot about, and this is something that I think is going to the pandemic has definitely exposed, is what's professional attire and that piece of it. And I was thinking about what to wear for tonight. Do I wear a full suit? Do I wear a tank top that I wear to a Pride event? I kind of went with something in between, but for me, letting students know, letting the like those that you support know that you're an advocate for them and you're going to try the best you can, but also support them and prepare them for what is right now.
I love that. And I actually wanted that tailed into my next question is about, teaching our students, but also yourself. So when you look at an employer and like, let's say employer for yourself or an employer for a student that you teach a student, what are some red flags or things that you say, my spidey sense is tingling, and I like using nerd terms because, Marvel comics, but
Sure.
like these are some red flags. Like what are some things that students and as well as yourself look for in employers as red flags to, that this is not a good space for me?
Sure. So I think it depends on the individual and their lens and what they're going to see. One of the things that I talk about with if a space seems inclusive to one marginalized identity, it might not be to the other one. I mean, I've heard from LGBTQIA plus folks of color that they might feel supported within that identity, but not in their BIPOC identity. So there's different ways that that there can be red flags to things. What I would say, I guess a couple of them is, job description saying he, she, an employer not introducing themselves with their pronouns, or even just the body language that they could have if a student were to, just going to give an example here, use they series pronouns to talk about themselves. Those could be red flags during the interview process. I think that if there's a large enough company that doesn't have employer resource groups or affinity groups or those types of things, that could be a red flag. There's a lot of ways that can happen. Even and one that I've come across in my own experience is being asked if I have a wife, if I have children, those types of things, that's probably not as much one that the student population with age, they mostly tend to be in the 18 to 23. But yeah, those are some red flags.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm trying to use. I've started working really hard at saying partner. Words matter. Like, do you have a partner or significant other? But then also, I don't ask now. Even also, I don't even ask that no more. I think it's. Is it one of the? And this is just your opinion. Is it a best bet to just let people reveal themselves and not really try to dig and I guess not put people in spotlight to have because I feel like if you keep on saying, do you have a partner and this and that, like, I don't know, just making assumptions. I think that's my question is like, maybe just try to eliminate assumptions and just let people reveal who they want to be themselves to you.
No, absolutely. I think that you want to give people the space to affirm their partnerships, whether same-sex two men or a non-binary person and a woman or two women to affirm their relationship and have a space where they can do that, where if there is a company event, whether it's in person or virtual, they can bring that part of them to also. I mean, another piece to consider is that relationship structures within our community can be fluid and have different elements to them, and even going as far as to assume that someone is either single or has one partner. I mean that can be that's something to think about within making assumptions, asking questions. So I think giving people the space, whatever types of relationships they have, to be able to share and celebrate those. I mean, I talk about especially in the flag football and kickball leagues that I'm in, the friendships that I've developed over the last 4 years since I first started joining those. And I kind of think about, I'm 34 and I keep thinking about that Jay-Z song 30 something. And I'm just like I feel that for myself right now, and being able to celebrate that in the space is huge.
I love it. And so I got my last question for you. I like to be forward thinking, and so I'm going to kind of ask the same question I asked to Sandra, or kind of a variation of, where do you think this industry, micro and macro, so career services and then higher ed in general, where do we need to go to be a more inclusive and a better space for others?
Sure. So for career services, I think that we need to redefine what professionalism means. And I don't have all the answers to what that looks like, but I think kind of moving away from, I think with and this is something I'm still kind of exploring the thoughts for myself on how I feel here, is with attire. I think that uh, because you want people to bring their best authentic self to an interview or to what have you. So even though I give suggestions on professional attire for interview, I'm starting to move away from what colors to wear or not wearing too much jewelry. And I do in my classes have an article that talks about hairstyles and discrimination that can happen there, and how that's wrong and that needs to change. So I'm hoping that those components happen within our space. I think that's going to be a good start. And there's so many other ways that we need to have some change. I mean, within higher education as a whole, I would say that, and this is something that come up for debate. I think there's a celebrate, and I don't want to necessarily use the word normalize, but just have being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community just be such a embedded component. And I think that what we're already starting to find is that you have more and more younger people that you might have heard that some of the terms of previous generations of someone is, oh, they're a little bit gay or something like that, that just not having straight be the assumption, regardless of how someone presents. That's really within this space, I think, what I would love to see. And I think that even kind of going beyond higher education, even within the K to 12, I think some of those changes they are happening, but need to happen as well.
I love it. Now, Steve, as I said, how can people, if you feel comfortable, how can they connect with you and engage with you post this show?
Absolutely. I mean, you can go onto my LinkedIn. It's just Steve Savinski. I do have Instagram. I don't post on there that often. It's at Steve Savinski. I didn't pick a fun one. Maybe I'll change the handle at some point. Definitely, yeah, those two.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Steve. Love to have you. Loved having you on, and we'll collaborate again. But I really appreciate your time. And so, without further ado, bye-bye.
Hey, thank you, Bill. Yeah.
Without further ado, we're gonna bring on my last person. We're gonna land this plane. I know this is past her bedtime, but I'm so appreciative. Shout out. Thank you for staying awake. Shout out to Victoria. Gone but never forgotten. My former
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, as I said earlier, how would you like me to address? How do you, identify what your salient identities? I like to start that off for this conversation and go right into it.
Sure. So, I'm a cisgendered lesbian female.
There you go. I love it. All right.
Thank you.
You passed your own test on yourself. All right.
Thank you.
So earlier, unbeknownst, you did a presentation earlier, and I actually joined, and you were dropping mad gems. And I was like, wow, I'm just going to ask some more questions. So, in regards to that, you working in the career services space, but in general, what I'm actually going to tail off of what I asked to Steve. What are some of the things that you look for in an employer as things to, be red flags or things that you like, I want to work for this person? And particularly these are, career development things, but what are your red flags and how do you identify those?
Sure. So something that I mentioned earlier in the other session, but I think it's definitely relevant here, is that when an employer is inclusive with a particular population, with a particular minority population, they tend to bleed over into other minority populations. And when they're not, it's the same. So in the example I gave earlier was, there was, I saw evidence that they were not inclusive of people with disabilities. And so you have to ask yourself, if this employer is not inclusive of people with disabilities, then are they going to be inclusive of the LGBTQ population or of, racial minorities, et cetera? And usually, the evidence is that they're not. So what I'd say is, sometimes you can't walk in there and look around the room and know, hey, these people are or aren't this identity, but I have other indicators. And sometimes, if you don't see a lot of different genders around the table, if you don't see different people, different ethnicities around the table, and we know not everything is visual. But usually those, the language also, what language are they using? But usually you can kind of, in the interview process, get a really good sense of whether or not inclusivity is a core value. And if it's not, and it matters to you, then that's probably not a place where you should be. But this is the type of information I would share with a student.
I love it. And also ones that you do for yourself. So I'd like to know, do you think overall the industry macro, so I'll say higher ed, macro, and then, no, that's macro. Yeah, then micro career services is LGBTQ or queer, I guess I'm just going to say queer friendly. Do you think it is in general or not? And this is an anecdotal question. So not backed by facts.
So I'll say that when I was on the team with you, Phil, I had the benefit of being at possibly one of the most inclusive focused, diversity focused career centers in the country. So I feel like the whole time I'm listening to everybody else talk, I'm going to say, oh yes, career services, they're the most inclusive. They're the ones that are doing the work. They're doing a great job, super forward thinking. And then I realized it was our center. And I'm not sure that was, that's not everyone's experience. And so the reason there is because we're dealing with folks that are outside of our purview, right? So the employers are doing whatever they want, and they are the ones that are often making the donations to the school. And depending on what the structure of the budget or the funding model is, perhaps they have more influence than at other institutions. And so I think there's a long way to go. So long as the funding's dependent on these folks that possibly are still pushing antiquated or outdated values and thoughts, then, we're kind of at their mercy. So unfortunately, I think there's a long way to go across the country. I also think that students are on our campuses and they're receiving a certain level of support and care and consideration, and then they get thrust out into the real world, and the companies are like, we're not doing that. We're not going to be a part of that. I understand at college you experienced it, but that's over now. So get to work. And so if someone gets their feelings hurt, they're like, it doesn't matter. We have a job to do. Let's just keep going. So I would say that there's a lot, both in the employer side, certainly in career services, there's a lot more to be done.
I mean, I was actually saying, I was like, wow, like, I think, as I learned, higher ed is just like anything, it's a microcosm of the world, right? Like, it's a system and no system is perfect. But then at the same time, I think you just spoke to it, that sometimes it is a utopian thing for students per se, like, campus stickers and safe zones and all that. And then they go out into the real world, and that's a lot of organizations don't have training and all that. So do you think, I don't know, I'm not saying is it a setup, but like what do you think that we can do? Do we need to tell students the harsh reality? Like, wow, like we really, this higher education space is this way, but be ready for the real world, as they say. That makes sense.
Well, I think, what, I heard Sandra talking about it. I feel like Steve may have brought it up as well, just a couple times, but it's like, what we're really going to find out there is we're going to find our chance to be the voice for people that need it. And that's, everybody's looking for the company that's already arrived and already looking for the company that, everything is safe and lovely and wonderful. But the truth is those companies need all of us to speak up. And so just as, Steve said, I'm always coming out. Well, guess what? An ally is always standing up. You just can't stand up two Novembers ago. And now I'm like, well, I'm done. I said my piece. We need you every day to stand up and to fight the fight. And so I feel like, what do the companies need to do? I mean, it's up to all the folks on the ground. It's, boots on the ground getting this work done. And so everyone puts it on the company, but the company is really all the people that work there. It's you and me. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think you're right. You're saying it's continuous. So I like this question. I think this is one of my questions. How does, colleagues show real, true, authentic allyship versus performative allyship?
I would say, I think someone had maybe mentioned this earlier, but just speaking up, and that's it. I mean, when we're alone in my office and you're telling me, oh yeah, I get it. Everything's good. But then we're in a group and someone makes a joke, that's really the time. And I understand, there's jokes and, people are just doing little nudges and stuff. But if there's something that's said and you say you're an ally, that's the time to stand up, because the person in the marginalized group, they don't really have the power to stand up for themselves. I mean, they'll certainly can try and stuff, but, it doesn't land like it lands if the majority of the person in the majority stands up and speaks out. So that's what I would say.
And so I just wondered, what challenges have you faced previously or other places? What challenges have you faced, whether in this industry or just in occupations in general, because of your identities? And if you feel comfortable sharing a story, obviously leaving the name out, but just a story anecdotally, I don't know, that's not the right word for anecdotal, but share a story of that experience that you're comfortable with.
Sure. I mean, I would just say, I'll speak first, I guess, generally, that what happens is that people that are in their careers and working in businesses, they're getting some work done, but it's also there's a strong social component. And you and I are super outgoing. So of course there's the social component of it. So what happens is, if you're going into work every day and you don't have the same experiences as somebody there, right? So everyone's talking about their opposite sex partner, or they're talking about, starting to have a family or things of that nature. Right out of the gate, you can be happy for the other people, but you're already behind the eight ball. You're at a disadvantage because you don't have the same experiences and you're not sharing. So I would say, generally speaking, not being able to share some of those experiences, especially while I was still closeted, that was something that was kind of just generally speaking at different organizations. I would say I did accept a job at a place. And during the interview process, I kept interviewing at this one place. I really wanted it. It's a long story, but the interviewer, who ended up being my boss, she asked me on several occasions during the interview if I had a boyfriend or a husband. And so I said no, because I was engaged to a woman. So I told her no. And then she really felt sorry for me. And then as my employment started, she kept asking me, you don't have a boyfriend, you don't have a husband. I know somebody. So she wanted to fix me up. And I'm like, at this point, I have a wife at home, or almost a wife at home at that point. So it was just one of these things where, and then I met another person at the organization who I knew was a lesbian, and she had been there for 20 years and closeted. And so then I realized that this organization is not a safe place. And then there was a lot of effeminate, these men are effeminate, these kind of conversations like that. I ended up leaving, obviously. But that was just kind of a situation where it's from the beginning, you were on the outside. There was a lot of negative comments, and this community was not safe there. But that's just an experience that I lived, and it's fine. I mean, things happen. I tend to minimize things, which I know is terrible. But that's kind of how I dealt with it.
I was about to say, that sounds terrible, because that was 20 years of someone hiding their identity. Did you have a deeper conversation with that person about why they did that? And it was particularly in reaction to the supervisor individually, or just the overall office?
I mean, I didn't ask her why she hid that identity, but I will say it was kind of an industry that was more friendly to males. And so maybe because she had risen up in the ranks, she felt that was her shot, was to hide herself. And so, there's one of those self-perpetuating things where it's yeah, I hid, and look at me, I'm getting ahead, so I'm going to keep hiding. Oh, so I don't know. It was working for her, quote unquote.
Yes, that seems very difficult. So, did you have, a mentor or someone, I guess someone that you looked up to in leadership that shared the identities as you, and then with that person that shared those identities with you, did you like ask them questions about how they navigate this space, particularly maybe higher ed space or any other industry space, career space?
Mhm. You know what? I don't. I heard others talk about it. I didn't really have that. In fact, I felt that I got more mentorship and becoming comfortable with who I am from my heterosexual colleagues. And so I don't know if it was just one of those things where, you know, there's a lot of shame around this identity. And so when the majority accepts you and validates you and helps you to come about and feel that everything's okay, that's where I seem to find my mentorship. And I remember very vividly, you know, 2 or 3 people throughout my career that really, you know, they would ask about a girl I was dating or ask about my fiance in a way that I'm like, oh, I really think this is normal. Like people are talking about their husbands and I'm talking about my wife and this is normal. And so that's kind of where I got the sense that I'm making a valuable contribution and it's okay to be me. And certainly at Mason, that was probably, you know, the most out I've ever been at work. I've worked places for years and never once said anything. And so
that's very fascinating. So you said Mason was the place that you were the most out. What were some of the small micro things? And what were the, like, as Sandra said, you know, day one, someone said something about her haircut. That was like, wow. Like, what were some of the little things that you took mental notes and say, okay, this is a place where I could do that, to do that? Like, what were some of those instances that allowed you to do that?
So to set the stage for anyone that's never been to George Mason, the office where I was interviewing is on the 3rd floor, and on the 2nd floor is the LGBTQ Center. So as I walked to my interview, I'm walking past rainbow flags and the transgender flag, and so everything there is, you know, it's right in the building. So right out of the gate, you're feeling, hey, this is a valued identity here. When I was toured around campus by the person who would become my supervisor, you know, she had a rainbow flag in her office. And I saw some in other people's offices. Many people even had the safe zone plaque outside their office saying that they had been a part of it. And so, you know, like I said, right from the beginning, it was an idea that, hey, everybody here is accepting their, you know, you can be who you are here. And so the very first week I actually disclosed my identity, and it was treated like any other, you know, that if I had said I had a husband. So I'm in my 40s and I'm just it took me that long to find a place to be comfortable. So I really appreciated that. And so I do consider my colleagues from Mason to be true allies.
See, I mean, that's very fascinating to me because, like, off the break, one instance or one environment, you were like, you could tell off the break that you don't do this. And then in other environment, like, it was a week. And I think that's quite significant to me. Like, a place that you could work for years and in 1 week, you know, that could be stark difference. So I think that organically, even visuals, but also just language, early on language, sets that tone. Is that kind of a correct assessment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and, you know, people at Mason, you hear them talking about referring to their, you know, if they're married to a spouse, for example, they refer to people as partner or spouse. It's super inclusive. Nobody makes assumptions. And that was probably what drove me to say something week 1, too, because when people would ask me about my personal life, it was never that a heteronormative assumption, you know, it really was open-ended. And so, you know, they're letting you know it's okay to be yourself when they're asking those questions. And so, you know, I felt comfortable to do that.
All right. And then this is my last question for you. And I like this as the way I like to be forward thinking. So what, similar as I asked every guest that I had before, what can the micro do, which is career services, do to be better at this? And then what can the macro do, higher ed, do to be better at this? And when I say this, you know, inclusivity.
Sure. So I actually, in the private chat, Phil, I did drop a link in there for the viewers today.
Yeah.
I actually authored a couple of chapters in a textbook recently, and it talks about this very subject, it's basically about what higher education can do, to provide the inclusivity to the LGBTQ population, as well as the population, in general. But I can say some things that career services can do specifically is having those conversations with employers if they're hearing things that are not okay. And, you know, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be ruckus about it, but just to say, oh, you must mean partner, you must mean this, you know what I mean? Just correcting that in the moment and moving on. So I think they had to be ready to have those conversations. I think any of the images that they're showing, for example, traditionally male roles showing females doing it and vice versa. providing, maybe showing people that are wearing clothes that are not, gender conforming, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of things where we're thinking about career, we're stepping out of college into the next part of our life. And so we're normalizing what someone would do in this community after college and as they're gearing up to go out and interview. So I think that could be helpful. In higher education, I had some suggestions in the chapters that I wrote. I was just looking over those right before this. But some of it is, you're introducing LGBTQ authors or poets, or mentioning that, hey, this particular person and his husband, and saying it in class, not omitting that. They talk about whitewashing history. Well, they do the same with, the LGBTQ population, and omit that part of a movie or of a story, of a textbook. So making sure that those are working their ways into the classroom. I had a pretty significant experience years ago where I worked with somebody who was missing both of his two of his limbs. And the first day I met him, it was quite shocking. I'd never met somebody that was missing two limbs like that. I met him day one of my employment, and within a year, it really faded in the background, Phil. I never thought about the fact that he didn't have those limbs. And I feel the same is true for this population. If you can continue to put us in your thoughts and talk about us, show us in the classroom, to just normalize the conversation, then it will fade into the background. It won't be a shock when we talk about our significant others or our identities. And so I feel, just putting us in the classroom and making us part of the conversation, that's what higher ed can do in order to help everybody.
I love it. Well, thank you. I know that you're trying to conk out and Netflix and chill. I don't know. That's how the young people say it. But I know you want to get some sleep, but I really appreciate it. So for those that are joining, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So I'm really active on LinkedIn. So please find me on LinkedIn. I guess if you just type in Victoria Suarez, I should come up. Victoria Suarez Technical Recruiter is probably what it says. So you can find me there. I don't do any of the other real social media things. I'm on Facebook, but I like LinkedIn. So find me. There
you go. Well, thank you, Victoria. And so I'm going to wrap up with this. So thank you, everybody. This has been a great episode. I really, really enjoyed this. I actually learned a lot. I'm just kind of mad that I was looking so focused that I didn't take notes. Because normally I take notes and I write down things to come back. So I'm going to have to check this out later, because I really learned a lot tonight. And hopefully you did too, for those that joined. For those that missed this, don't worry. This link will be live so you can watch it later, as well as I will be posting the audio of this. So for those that are more audio listeners, they can listen to this as an audio podcast on iTunes or Spotify or whatever you listen to. As I land this plane, I also just want to do last plug. Intelligent Change, my 5-minute journal, and Tiny Froze. Check them out, either intelligentchange.com or tinyfroze.com. Shout out to Mike Frimpong, my frat brother, who is involved in this show, and shout out to Intelligent Change for the 5-minute journal. And for those, thank you so much for joining. This has been a great episode. Maybe I'll continue to do these series again of different identities in career services or different identities in different industries, but I really just enjoy doing this, and I really enjoy engaging with the guest, and I really enjoy having these conversations where I get to learn and grow. So thank you. Have a great night, get some good sleep, and we're out.